First, Congress cannot pass laws that restrict freedom of speech, the press, religion, or peaceful assembly. Citizens also have the right to petition the government. These protections were designed to prevent the government from silencing dissent. The Supreme Court has extended most of them to apply to state governments as well. Second, citizens have the right to keep and bear arms. The amendment references a well-regulated militia, which led to decades of legal debate over whether the right applies to individuals or only to organized groups. In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled it protects individual ownership, independent of militia service. Third, the government cannot force citizens to house soldiers in their homes during peacetime. In wartime, Congress may authorize it by law. This was a direct response to British practice before the Revolution. It is the least litigated amendment in American history. Fourth, people are protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. Police generally need a warrant to search a home or take property. The warrant must describe specifically what is being searched and be based on probable cause. Evidence obtained without a valid warrant can be excluded from trial. Fifth, no one can be tried for a serious federal crime without a grand jury indictment. No one can be tried for the same crime twice. No one can be forced to testify against themselves. The government cannot take private property without fair compensation, and no one can lose life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Sixth, in criminal cases, the accused has the right to a speedy and public trial by jury. They must be told the charges against them. They have the right to confront witnesses, call their own witnesses, and have an attorney. If they cannot afford one, the government must provide one. Seventh, in federal civil cases involving more than $20, either party can demand a jury trial. Once a jury decides the facts, no court can overturn those findings except on legal grounds. The dollar threshold has never been updated. It is rarely invoked in federal practice today. Eighth, bail cannot be set at an unreasonably high amount. Fines cannot be excessive. Punishment cannot be cruel or unusual. Courts have used this amendment to challenge the death penalty, solitary confinement, and prison conditions. What qualifies as cruel and unusual continues to be contested. Ninth, the Constitution lists specific rights, but that list is not exhaustive. Just because a right is not written down does not mean it does not exist. This amendment was added to prevent the government from arguing that unlisted rights are not protected. It has been cited in cases involving privacy and other rights not named elsewhere in the text. 10th, any power not given to the federal government by the Constitution and not prohibited to the states belongs to the states or to the people. This is the foundation of American federalism. It limits federal authority and preserves state power. Disputes over where that line falls continue today. 11th, states cannot be sued in federal court by citizens of another state or by foreign nationals. It was passed after the Supreme Court ruled against Georgia in a debt lawsuit brought by a South Carolina citizen. The amendment limits the reach of federal courts over state governments. States can still be sued by their own citizens in their own courts. 12th, the original Constitution had electors cast a single vote for two candidates. The top vote-getter became president. The second became vice president. This produced situations where the president and vice president were political opponents. The 12th Amendment fixed this by requiring separate electoral votes for each office. 13th, slavery is abolished throughout the United States. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude can exist except as punishment for a crime. Congress has the power to enforce this by law. It was ratified in December 1865, 8 months after the Confederacy surrendered. 14th, anyone born or naturalized in the United States is a citizen. States cannot deny citizens equal protection under the law or take life, liberty, or property without due process. This overturned the Dred Scott decision, which had ruled that Black Americans could never be citizens. It became the constitutional foundation for civil rights law. 15th, the right to vote cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It was ratified in 1870 to secure voting rights for black men after the Civil War. States responded with literacy tests, poll taxes, and organized violence. Full enforcement did not come until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 16th Congress has the power to collect taxes on income from whatever source without distributing the revenue based on state population. Before this, a direct federal income tax was practically impossible under the Constitution. The amendment cleared the way for the modern tax system. It was ratified in 1913. 17th, United States senators are elected directly by voters in each state. Before this, state legislatures chose senators. Reformers argued the system produced corruption and made senators accountable to political machines rather than citizens. Direct election became part of the Constitution in 1913. 18th, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors is prohibited throughout the United States. This was the constitutional basis for prohibition. The amendment did not ban personal consumption. It took effect in 1920 and lasted 14 years. 19th, the right to vote cannot be denied based on sex. Women had been organizing for this right since 1848. The amendment was ratified in August 1920 after decades of resistance in Congress and state legislatures. It remains one of the largest single expansions of voting rights in American history. 20th. The presidential term begins on January 20th instead of March 4th. Congress convenes on January 3rd. These changes reduced the long gap between election and taking office, during which defeated officials still held power. That transitional period is now called the lame duck period. 21st. The 18th Amendment is repealed. Prohibition is over. States retain the authority to regulate alcohol within their own borders. This is the only constitutional amendment ratified entirely through state conventions rather than state legislatures. Some counties in the United States remain dry today. 22nd. No person can be elected president more than twice. If someone serves more than 2 years of another president's term, they can only be elected to one additional term. This was passed in response to Franklin Roosevelt, who won 4 presidential elections. Before this, the 2-term limit was a tradition, not a law. 23rd. Washington, D.C. receives electoral votes in presidential elections. The number of electors cannot exceed the least populous state. D.C. currently receives 3. Before this amendment, residents of the national capital had no vote for president despite living under federal law. D.C. still has no voting representation in Congress. 24th. The right to vote in federal elections cannot be conditioned on paying a poll tax. Poll taxes had been used throughout the South to prevent poor black citizens from voting. This amendment applied only to federal elections. 2 years later, the Supreme Court extended the prohibition to state elections as well. 25th. If the president dies, resigns, or is removed, the vice president becomes president. If the vice presidency is vacant, the president nominates a replacement, subject to a majority vote in both chambers of Congress. If the president is temporarily unable to serve, the vice president acts as president. Congress can also remove a president who is incapacitated and refuses to acknowledge it. 26th. The voting age is lowered to 18. This was ratified in 1971 during the Vietnam War, when young men could be drafted and sent to combat but could not vote. The argument was direct: old enough to fight, old enough to vote. It remains the last amendment to change who is eligible to cast a ballot. 27th. Congressional pay raises cannot take effect until after the next election. Members of Congress cannot vote themselves an immediate salary increase. This amendment was first proposed in 1789 as part of the original Bill of Rights, but sat unratified for 203 years. A University of Texas student rediscovered it in 1982 and launched a ratification campaign. It became law in 1992. Thanks for watching. If you could add a 28th Amendment, what would it be? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.